Part 2, The Firewall. A masterclass on the audience, their defenses, and what comes after the age of scarcity. 1 in the morning. Picture a room at 1 in the morning. One person lying on their side, phone held about 20 centimeters from their face. The light is that particular cold blue that makes skin look slightly dead. The thumb moves. It has been moving for a while. There is a small, warm patch on the mattress where the phone has been resting. Ask that person what they have watched in the last 40 minutes and they will not be able to tell you. Not most of it, not any of it really. Somewhere in there was a dog doing something, a recipe, an argument between two people they have never met about a subject they do not care about. 3 seconds of a film they have already seen. And underneath all of it, a feeling that is not quite pleasure and not quite boredom, and that has no name in any language I know. In the last masterclass, I stood up here and told you how to get into that person's nervous system. I gave you the mechanism. I gave you 5 stages. I told you that the specific sensory detail is the one thing that gets past the filter, and I meant it, and I still mean it. This one is about the person on the mattress, and I should say the obvious thing early because it is going to sit under everything for the next hour. That person is also you. There is no room in the world containing only makers and no audience. You go home, you lie down. Your thumb moves too. So, 3 arguments. 1, the thing I taught you to use as craft is the same thing being used on you as an exploit, and the difference is not the mechanism. 2, the audience has built a defense. It is genuinely getting stronger, and it is costing them more than anyone admits. 3, all of this is breaking an economic model that most of our industries are still quietly built on. And what replaces it is stranger and better than it sounds. Let us go. Part 1, the same currency. We need to clear up the dopamine thing because almost everyone says it wrong, including me until about a year ago. The phrase is dopamine hit. The image is a little squirt of pleasure delivered to your brain every time something good happens on a screen. That image is wrong, and the correct version is much more useful to you. In the late 1980s and through the 1990s, Wolfram Schultz was recording from individual dopamine neurons in monkeys. The going theory was simple. Dopamine equals pleasure. Monkey gets juice, dopamine fires. But Schultz noticed something that did not fit. Once the monkey learned that a light predicted the juice, the dopamine burst moved. It stopped firing at the juice and started firing at the light. And when the juice arrived exactly as expected, the neurons barely responded at all. Then he did the cruel and brilliant part. He turned on the light and withheld the juice. At the moment the juice should have arrived, those neurons did not just go quiet, they dropped below their baseline rate. What Schultz had found was not a pleasure signal, it was a teaching signal. Dopamine tracks the gap between what you predicted and what you got. Better than expected, it surges. Exactly as expected, nothing. Worse than expected, it goes negative and you feel that as disappointment. You have heard this before from me in the other room. We spent an hour last time on predictive processing and prediction error. This is the same machinery seen from the reward side. Your brain is a prediction engine, and the currency it runs on is the difference between expectation and outcome. Now hold that next to the design of a feed. If dopamine were a pleasure signal, the way to build an addictive product would be to make every piece of content excellent. It is not. If everything were reliably excellent, your brain would learn to predict excellence and the signal would flatten to 0. The way to build an addictive product is to make the reward unpredictable, mostly mediocre, occasionally extraordinary, and crucially, never in a pattern you can learn. That is not a feed, that is a slot machine, and the resemblance is not a coincidence or a metaphor. It is the same schedule of reinforcement, and it works for the same reason. Which brings me to the uncomfortable part, and I would rather say it than have you notice it on the way home. Everything I taught you in the last masterclass is the same currency. The load-bearing detail generates prediction error. The unrepeatable moment generates prediction error. The imperfect take that violates the audience's model of good acting generates prediction error. I told you to design for the body before the conscious mind gets a vote, and I told you that this is the last remaining edge, and both of those things are true. They are also, word for word, a description of how you would build a manipulation. So the difference cannot be in the mechanism. There is only one mechanism. The difference has to be somewhere else, and finding out where is most of what this hour is for. Here is my first attempt at it, and we will refine it as we go. A slot machine generates prediction error and gives you nothing to keep. A film generates prediction error and leaves something in your body that is still there in a week. Same currency, opposite balance sheet. Part 2. The firewall. The audience is not a passive surface that you either reach or fail to reach. The audience is running countermeasures, and the countermeasures are old, layered, and increasingly good. Start with the oldest layer, which we covered last time, habituation. Repeated exposure to a predictable stimulus reduces the processing your brain gives it. The neurons literally lower their firing rate. This is not a decision, it is maintenance. Now watch what habituation does when it gets organized. In 1998, two researchers at Rice University, Jan Pinheiro Benway and David Lane, ran a study that gave us the term banner blindness. They found that users systematically missed links in banner-shaped positions on a page. And here is the detail that matters. They missed those links even when the link contained exactly the information they had been asked to find. Sitting in an ad-shaped position was enough to make relevant content invisible. The Nielsen-Norman Group has been rerunning versions of this for over 20 years and keeps finding the same thing. People almost never look at anything that looks like an advertisement, whether or not it actually is one. Their eyes route around it, not consciously. The filter fires before the content reaches awareness. Think about what that actually is. Your visual system has learned an abstract shape, the shape of something is being sold to me, and it now intercepts that shape pre-consciously. Your audience has grown a piece of anatomy that did not exist 3 generations ago. The second layer is cognitive rather than perceptual, and it has a name from consumer psychology. In 1994, Marion Freestad and Peter Wright published the Persuasion Knowledge Model in the Journal of Consumer Research. Their argument was that people accumulate, over a lifetime, a working theory of how persuasion is done, what tactics exist, what the agent wants, what the tactic is trying to do to them. The important mechanism in their model is what happens at the moment of recognition. They call it a change of meaning. The instant you identify something as a persuasion attempt, the thing you are looking at stops being what it appeared to be and becomes evidence about the person who made it. A warm story about a family dinner becomes a warm story about a family dinner that somebody paid for. What follows is a detachment effect. The audience steps back and discounts. That knowledge accumulates through exposure, which means that a generation exposed to more persuasion earlier from more directions arrives at the detachment reflex sooner. And that is exactly what the recent survey work keeps finding. Gen Z lives inside social platforms and distrusts advertising on them at higher rates than older cohorts. Consumer trust research in late 2025 found roughly 6 in 10 Gen Z respondents saying they do not find social media advertising trustworthy, while their trust in television advertising sits at about the same level as the general adult population. The generation most immersed in a channel is the most skeptical of it. The reflex is now extending to production method as well as format. Industry research this year found that a majority of younger consumers say discovering a brand used AI-generated advertising without disclosing it reduces their trust in that brand, and a large majority want disclosure. Polish, which used to be evidence of investment, is starting to function as evidence of automation. And with Gen Alpha, the pattern arrives even earlier. They did not build ad skepticism gradually the way millennials did, trusting television commercials well into adolescence. They were raised inside algorithmic feeds, unboxing videos and in-game promotion from the beginning. Early panel work suggests a majority can identify sponsored content within seconds, and that they treat the identification as a reason to disengage rather than as a neutral fact. There is a lovely, brutal detail in that research. For a meaningful share of them, the word authentic has become a red flag, not a compliment, a tell. That is the firewall. Perceptual filtering at the bottom, persuasion knowledge above it, and a cultural layer on top that keeps updating the signature file. Part 3. What it costs to run at maximum. Now the part that most people leave out because it does not flatter anyone. A firewall set to maximum has false positives. Go back to Benway's finding for a moment because it is genuinely alarming when you sit with it. The participants missed the link that answered the question they had been asked. The filter was not evaluating content, it was evaluating shape. Anything in the wrong shape was discarded before evaluation, including the thing they actually wanted. Scale that up to an entire information environment, and you get a person who is protected and also in a specific and measurable way, worse off. There is a word for the felt experience of this, and it went mainstream in 2024 when Oxford University Press made brain rot its word of the year after usage rose by 230% in a single year. The phrase is not new. It appears in Thoreau's Walden in 1854. In a complaint about people who preferred trivial reading, but it landed in 2024 because it named something people recognized in themselves. Mental fog, a shortened attention span, the sense that your mind has been reformatted for 15-second clips. Let me be careful here because this is a place where the discourse gets sloppy and I do not want to sell you a scare. There is no good evidence that ordinary heavy scrolling causes structural damage to the brain. What the research shows is an association between intensive short-form video use and poorer performance on attention tasks, worse sleep, and higher anxiety scores. And crucially, the effects look functional and reversible. When usage drops, the measures tend to recover, which is a much more interesting finding than damage, by the way. Damage would mean the audience is broken, reversible means the audience is trained, and training can be redirected. Here is what the training consists of. A feed teaches one micro-behavior thousands of times a day. Evaluate in under 2 seconds, abandon, next. You are not losing the capacity for sustained attention. You are practicing its opposite at industrial scale. This is what I think your term overactive attention allocation is pointing at, and I think it is the right way round. The problem is not that people cannot pay attention, it is that they are paying it constantly in tiny amounts to everything as a defensive posture. Continuous shallow evaluation is not rest, it is labor. It is a security guard checking every single face at the door, all day, forever. We have decent causal evidence for the cost now. In February 2025, a randomized controlled trial published in PNAS Nexus took 467 adults and used an app to block all mobile internet on their phones for 2 weeks, with compliance objectively tracked. Calls and texts still worked, laptops still worked, just the always-on pocket connection went away. 91% of participants improved on at least one of 3 measures: mental health, subjective well-being, and objectively measured sustained attention. The attention effect was large enough that the researchers described it as comparable to reversing about 10 years of age-related decline. And the mediation analysis found the mechanism was not mysterious. People who could not reach the feed spent that time socializing in person, exercising, and being outdoors. So the firewall is real, it works, and it is expensive. The audience is paying for it in fatigue, and you are paying for it too from the other side. Every defense they build is a wall between your work and the person you made it for, which is why the question of how you get through it is not a tactical question. It is the whole question. Part 4, the firewall is shaped like a shape. Here is where I have to complicate the flattering version of this story because the flattering version will get you killed commercially, and it is also just not true. The young firewall is fast. It is not deep. The best evidence on this comes from the Stanford History Education Group, who spent years assessing what they call civic online reasoning. In one national study, they gave an assessment to nearly 3,500 American high school students. The results were not encouraging. Shown the Slate homepage, where some tiles are news stories and others are marked sponsored content, 2/3 of students could not reliably tell the difference. Shown a grainy video that claimed to document ballot stuffing in a US primary, and which was actually shot in Russia, 52% said it was strong evidence of American voter fraud. Out of more than 3,000 responses, 3 students traced the video to its source. 3. Across the tasks, students consistently judged credibility by surface, the aesthetics of the site, the domain, what the About page said about itself. Hold that next to everything in the last section, and you get the single most useful sentence in this masterclass. The firewall is shaped like a shape. It is extraordinarily good at detecting the visual and structural signature of persuasion. A banner, a rectangle, a perfect grade, a voice that sounds like a voiceover, a caption that ends with the hashtag. It fires on those in milliseconds, pre-consciously, with high accuracy. It is remarkably bad at the question underneath, which is, who made this, what do they want, and how would I check? So the defense blocks things that look like selling and waves through things that look like a friend. It filters format, not intent, which explains, in one move, the entire evolutionary history of digital marketing over the last 15 years. Every format that has worked by not matching the signature: native advertising, sponsored editorial, the influencer in her kitchen, the deliberately lo-fi phone shot UGC ad with the wobble left in, and every one of them is decayed or is decaying for the same reason. Camouflage is a pattern. The pattern gets learned, the signature file updates, what was invisible becomes the new banner. I want to name what that means honestly, including for the framework I gave you last time. The imperfection I told you to protect is now also a costume that can be bought. Handheld looks unstaged. Grain looks unstaged. A stutter left in the take looks unstaged. All of it can be and is being manufactured at scale, including by machines that have never been in a room. Which means specificity as an aesthetic is finished on roughly the same schedule as everything else. Specificity as a fact is not. And the audience's defense, weak as it is at provenance, is being trained on exactly that question right now. But the question moving through Gen Alpha focus groups is not, does this look real? They have given up on looks. It is, who is this and what do they want from me? That is a question you can answer well or badly, but you can no longer avoid it by shooting on a worse camera. Part 5, 2 ways through a firewall. So you have a defended audience with a format-shaped filter and a fatigue problem. There are exactly 2 strategies available, and every brand, campaign, and pitch is one of them, whether it admits it or not. The first is camouflage. Do not look like persuasion. Match the surrounding content so precisely that the filter does not fire. This works. It works measurably, and it has 3 costs that get paid later off the campaign's own balance sheet. The first cost is the half-life. Camouflage is a pattern, patterns get detected, and detection is permanent. The audience never unlearns a signature, which means a camouflage strategy is not a position, it is a treadmill, and the treadmill speeds up every cycle. The second cost is that when it is detected, you do not just lose the impression, you lose the change of meaning in freestyle and right sense, and it works backwards through everything you have made. The audience does not conclude that ad was an ad, they conclude that brand hides. Every previous piece of your work gets refiled under the new interpretation. The third cost is that it is now becoming illegal. Article 25 of the EU's Digital Services Act prohibits designing an interface in a way that deceives or manipulates users or materially impairs their ability to make free and informed decisions. That is not a guideline. In December 2025, the European Commission issued its first formal non-compliance decision under the Act, finding X €120 million with deceptive design among the breaches cited. A Digital Fairness Act aims squarely at dark patterns, addictive design, opaque influencer marketing, and intrusive personalization is moving through the European legislative machine now. If you work in Europe, and I do, the era in which camouflage was merely risky is closing. The second strategy is declaration. Be recognizably a persuasion attempt and be worth the attention anyway. This sounds naive until you look at what it does to the mechanism. When you declare, the filter fires immediately. You lose nothing because the filter was going to fire eventually, and now you have chosen the moment. What you gain is that the detachment effect has nothing left to do. There is no hidden intent to discover, so there is no later revelation to punish you for. The audience's remaining question collapses to something much simpler and much better for you. Is this worth my time? That is a question you can win with craft. It is the only question in this entire landscape that rewards being good. For brands, declaration means the trade is stated. You are giving attention, here is what you get. And what you get is not brand awareness, it is a specific piece of value, usefulness, beauty, laughter, a genuine sensory experience. The old contract sold reach to the advertiser. The new contract sells value to the audience and takes reach as a consequence. For marketers, it means the sensory trigger from the last masterclass still applies, but it applies inside a declared frame. The specific sound of the packaging opening does not need to pretend to be a stranger's home video. It needs to be true, and it needs to be worth the 4 seconds. For salespeople, this is the most concrete of all, and I want to be precise about it. Your prospect's persuasion knowledge is fully loaded before you open your mouth. They know the shape of a pitch. They have a model of what comes next. Every attempt to disguise the pitch as a conversation trips the filter and costs you the room. So declare the frame. I am here to sell you this. It costs this. Here is the one thing it does that nothing else does. Then spend everything you have on the vivid consequence, the exact quality of silence after the noise problem is solved. The temperature change when the old system goes. Their body can test those. And because you did not hide the frame, their analytical system is not busy running a threat assessment on you while their body evaluates. Camouflage buys the attention event. Declaration is the only thing that buys residue. Part 6. What this does to the film now, to the cinema, where all of this becomes strange and personal for a lot of us in this room. You have probably heard the story about second screen viewing. The version in circulation is that streaming executives ask screenwriters to have characters announce what they are doing so that viewers who have the show on in the background can follow along. It has produced some very good jokes, including an Oscars sketch rewriting Casablanca for the distracted. I want to be accurate about the status of that claim because it is disputed, and I am not interested in selling you an outrage. Several writers have described receiving that kind of note. Others say they have never had one. Netflix has denied it flatly and at senior level, with its film chairman saying there is no such principle and its chief content officer calling the idea offensive to filmmakers. Fine. Here is why it does not matter much whether the note is literally given. The behavior is real and enormous. Second screening has been measured across markets for over a decade, with majorities of viewers reporting they look at their phones while watching. Every incentive in a subscription business points toward retention under divided attention rather than immersion. And you do not need an explicit note for an incentive that size to shape what gets commissioned, what gets recut, and which pilot survives. Systems do not need memos, but watch the trap this creates because it is the exact trap from the last masterclass wearing a different coat. If you design for a divided audience, you produce work that cannot reward an undivided one. Repeat the plot, announce the action, score the emotion, and you have made something that survives being half-watched and offers nothing to someone who watches it fully. And the person who watched it fully learns that watching fully is not worth it. So next time they get their phone out, the firewall gets confirmed, the habit gets reinforced, and you have participated in training your own audience out of the capacity your art depends on, which points at the countermove. And I think it is the biggest commercial opportunity in this business. The scarce thing is no longer content. It is the conditions under which attention can be given safely. A dark room, other bodies, no notification, a screen you cannot pause, and a duration you have agreed to in advance. That is not nostalgia, and it is not a heritage product. It is the only environment left where a person can lower the firewall on purpose, and lowering the firewall is a real physiological relief for someone who has been running it at maximum since they woke up. And people are already paying for exactly this in other categories. The Offline Club, which started in Amsterdam and now runs in cities across the world, sells people a few hours in a room with their phones in a box. A 2025 YouGov survey found 47% of under 30s actively trying to reduce their screen time, against 32% of older Americans. Deloitte's UK consumer research found nearly a third of Gen Z had deleted a social media app in the previous 12 months. Young people are buying dumb phones and physical devices whose entire function is to lock them out of their own apps. Read that correctly. It is not a rejection of screens. It is a generation paying money to purchase the conditions for undivided attention because they cannot manufacture those conditions themselves. We own those conditions. We have owned them for 130 years. Cinema is a machine for consensual defenselessness. and we have spent 2 decades apologizing for it and trying to become more like a feed. Part 7, the end of the industrial logic. Which brings me to the argument underneath all of this and to what I think is actually happening to our business model. Almost every industry in this room inherited its logic from industrial manufacturing. That logic is simple. Value comes from the scarcity of supply. Make a thing that is hard to make. Control access to it. Charge for access. Under that logic, quality is a moat, production capacity is a moat, and distribution is a moat. All 3 moats are draining. Competence is free, as we established last time. Production capacity is a subscription. Distribution is a button. Now, I want to be careful here because there is a version of this argument that goes too far, and I do not want to give you a slogan you cannot defend in a meeting. Scarcity is not ending. Energy is scarce. Materials are scarce. Land is scarce. Skilled human hands are scarce, and getting more so. Care is scarce. Time is permanently scarce. Anyone telling you that everything is about to be abundant is selling something, and probably using camouflage to do it. What is collapsing is the scarcity of the replicable. Anything that can be copied at near zero cost is heading toward near zero price, and the set of copyable things has just expanded enormously to include competent writing, competent images, competent code, and competent video. That is the actual event, so value has to migrate somewhere. And it migrates to whatever is left that cannot be copied. That list is short, and it is the same list from the last Masterclass. Attention that was given rather than captured, trust that was earned rather than borrowed, presence, and the specific unrepeatable detail that came from a body that was somewhere. Those things are not abundant. They are getting scarcer while everything else gets cheaper, which means their relative value is rising fast. This is what I understand by residual value, and it is worth being precise. Residual value is not the transaction. It is what is still working in the person after the transaction is over. It is the reason they come back without being retargeted. It is the difference between a customer you have to buy every time and one who arrives on their own. Under industrial logic, that was called brand and treated as a soft asset. Under the new logic, it is the only asset because it is the only part of the operation that cannot be replicated by somebody with better software. And here is the last move, which I think is the most interesting thing in this whole hour. When solutions become abundant, the bottleneck moves upstream. If any competent solution can be generated on demand, then the scarce and valuable act is no longer solving it. It is finding the problem worth solving. Problem finding cannot be automated in the way solving can. And the reason is exactly the reason from the last masterclass. A model can generate 1,000 solutions to a stated problem. It cannot notice that the problem is stated wrong because noticing requires having been in the room. It requires a body standing in a kitchen at 6 a.m. registering that the counter is at the wrong height for the person actually cooking. Nobody wrote that down. It is not in the brief, it is not in the data, and it is not in the training set because it has never been articulated by anyone. That is a sensory seed. It is the same skill I asked you to practice last time, pointed at commerce instead of its story. So the future of a brand is not a company that makes a category of product. It is a company that is unusually good at noticing frictions nobody has named yet, and that has enough residual trust with a group of people that when it says, "We noticed this, we fixed it," the firewall stays down long enough for that sentence to land. That is a completely different organization from the one most of us work in. It is smaller, it is closer to the ground, it has fewer people optimizing the funnel and more people out in rooms noticing. Part 8, 5 defenses. I promised you the audience's side, and every person in this room is one. So here are 5 defenses. They are not a detox, and they are not abstinence. They are calibration. 1. Learn the mechanism, not the message. The most robust protection we have evidence for is not fact-checking after the fact. It is what researchers call psychological inoculation or pre-bunking, exposing someone in advance to a weakened dose of a manipulation technique so they recognize it later. The Cambridge Social Decision-Making Lab has tested this at genuine scale, including a field experiment that ran 90-second inoculation videos as YouTube pre-roll to roughly 5.4 million users. at a cost of a few cents per view, with measurable improvement in identifying manipulative content afterwards. The important part is that it works at the level of technique rather than claim. You cannot pre-refute every message. You can learn what emotional manipulation, false dichotomy, and scapegoating feel like from the inside, and then recognize them in any content, which is why the single most protective thing you can do for a young person is not to filter what they see. It is to show them how the trick is built. 2. Ask who paid, not what it looks like. This is the direct patch for the hole in part 4. The firewall reads surface, so consciously override it with the one question surface cannot answer. Who made this and what do they want? The research term is lateral reading, and it comes from the same Stanford group. Instead of staying on a page and evaluating how professional it looks, you leave it and find out what other sources say about who is behind it. It takes 30 seconds, and it outperforms every instinct you have about design quality. Professional fact-checkers do this reflexively. Almost nobody else does. 3. Watch the dip, not the hit. Remember Schultz's monkeys and the withheld juice. When a predicted reward does not arrive, dopamine drops below baseline, and you experience that as a flat, faintly sour feeling. That dip is the most honest instrument you own. Anything designed to hold you will produce it, because the dip is what brings you back. So stop asking whether something is enjoyable while you are inside it, which is exactly when you cannot tell. Ask what the 10 seconds after it feel like. Something that gave you a real experience leaves you slightly settled. Something that trained you leaves you flat and reaching. Learn the difference in your own body, and you will never need a screen time report again. 4. Restore the baseline on purpose. The PNAS Nexus trial is the good news in this whole masterclass. 2 weeks, 91% improved on something. The attention effect was substantial and the mechanism was ordinary. People went outside, saw other humans, did things with their hands. You do not need 2 weeks, and you do not need to become a monk. What you need is regular exposure to input that does not vary its reward schedule to hold you. A walk, a long book, a conversation with no agenda, boredom, deliberately, on purpose. Boredom is not the absence of stimulation. It is the state in which your prediction machine recalibrates, and if you never enter it, everything starts to feel flat because your baseline has risen. 5. Spend attention. Do not only defend it. A firewall is not a life. If the only thing you ever do is block, you end up in the state we described earlier, safe, exhausted, and unable to receive anything, including the things you would have loved. So do the opposite deliberately, at least sometimes. Choose something long and difficult and give it your whole attention on purpose with the phone in another room. Not because it is virtuous, because that is the only way to find out what your attention is actually worth when you spend it, instead of rationing it. And because a person who has recently experienced full attention can immediately feel the difference between work that deserves it and work that is farming them. That last sentence is the whole defense, and it is also, conveniently, the whole business model. Whose fire? Last time I left you with a fire in a clearing, and I asked whether you were designing for the heat or for the light. I want to come back to it once more because there is a property of that fire I did not mention, and it turns out to be the important one. The fire did not want anything from you. It was not measuring your dwell time, and it was not adjusting itself when your attention drifted. It did not become more interesting when you started to look away, and it did not withhold its next crack of resin to keep you sitting there. It was completely indifferent to whether you stayed, and that indifference is exactly why it was safe to give yourself to it. That is the thing no optimized system can offer ever by construction. A feed that did not want your attention would not be a feed, and your audience, at some level below language, knows the difference. It is what they are running the firewall against, not persuasion, which humans have lived with happily for thousands of years, but the specific modern experience of being wanted by something that does not care about you. So here's the question I want to leave you with, and it is a harder one than last time. Make the work, use the mechanism, design for the body, protect the load-bearing detail, chase residue rather than views. All of that still stands. But when someone gives you their attention and the firewall comes down and you have them, ask yourself what happens next. Does the experience end and leave something behind? Or does it end in a way that is engineered to bring them back tomorrow, slightly emptier than they arrived? Both are prediction error, both are craft. Only one of them is a fire. The other one just needs you to keep watching. Thank you.